I stood in my living room, staring at the certified letter in disbelief. $10,000. The HOA was actually fining me $10,000 because my house was the only one on the street that didn't get destroyed by Hurricane Melissa. I read the words again, my hands shaking. Violation of community aesthetic uniformity standards. They wanted to fine me because I survived. My name is Rachel Morrison, and I've lived in Sunset Pines, HOA community, for 12 years. When I bought my house back in 2012, it was a dream come true. A beautiful 3-bedroom home with a backyard that overlooked the community lake. The neighborhood was perfect. Families everywhere. Kids playing in the streets. The HOA seemed reasonable back then, mostly handling landscaping and pool maintenance. That all changed 3 years ago when Karen Westbrook moved into the neighborhood. Karen arrived like a tornado herself, buying the largest house on Magnolia Drive, with money from her 3rd divorce settlement. Within 6 months, she'd positioned herself as the HOA's Community Standards Liaison, a position she basically created for herself. Within a year, she was running for HOA Vice President, and she won by default because nobody else wanted to deal with the monthly meetings and constant complaints. Barbara Chen had been our HOA President for 8 years at that point. Barbara was everything an HOA President should be. Fair, practical, and actually cared about the community rather than power-tripping. She was a retired civil engineer in her early 60s, with short silver hair and glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. Barbara had helped me more than once over the years, from approving my fence installation to supporting my request for solar panels when some neighbors complained. But Karen saw Barbara as an obstacle to her vision of what Sunset Pines should be. I remember the first time Karen knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, 2 years ago. I was working from home when the doorbell rang. "Hello, Rachel," Karen said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was dressed in expensive athleisure wear, despite never setting foot in the community gym. "I'm Karen Westbrook, Vice President of the HOA. I'm doing a neighborhood inspection, and I noticed your mailbox is slightly faded. The HOA requires all mailboxes to be repainted every 3 years." I looked at my mailbox. It was barely faded, maybe a shade lighter than it had been. "I just painted it 18 months ago," I said. "Well, it needs to be done again," Karen said, making a note on her tablet. "You have 30 days to comply, or you'll receive a $50 fine for each week of non-compliance." Barbara called me that evening. "Rachel, please ignore Karen's mailbox nonsense. There's no 3-year painting requirement. She's making things up again. I'll handle it." And Barbara did handle it, that time, and dozens of others. Karen would create fake violations, and Barbara would shut them down. It became a pattern. Karen wrote up violations for grass being a 1/4-inch stutile, for garden gnomes being non-conforming decorative items, for cars being parked in driveways instead of garages. Every time, Barbara would review the actual HOA bylaws and overturn Karen's fabricated rules. "She's trying to force me out," Barbara told me one evening at a community barbecue in July. We were standing by the pool, watching kids play in the water. "Karen wants to be president, and she knows the only way she'll win an election is if I'm not running. She's been spreading rumors that I'm too old, that I don't care about property values, that I'm blocking necessary improvements to the neighborhood." Barbara raised her hand to wave at her grandson splashing in the shallow end, a genuine smile crossing her face, despite the stress Karen was causing her. "Don't let her win," I said. "This neighborhood needs you." "I'm not planning on it," Barbara said, adjusting her glasses with a slight laugh. "I've dealt with worse than Karen Westbrook in my career. She's old bark and no bite when she doesn't have actual authority." But Karen was patient, and she was building her base of support among newer residents who didn't know any better. Then came Hurricane Melissa. It was September when the weather reports started looking serious. Hurricane Melissa was a category 4 storm heading straight for our region. Meteorologists were predicting catastrophic damage, flooding, and power outages that could last weeks. Barbara sent out an email to the entire community with preparation tips. Secure outdoor furniture, stock up on water and non-perishables, have flashlights and batteries ready, know your evacuation routes. She included a list of emergency contacts and offered to help elderly residents with preparation. I took it seriously. I'd lived through hurricanes before, but never one this strong. My house was built in solid construction from an era when builders actually cared about hurricane resistance. But I knew that might not be enough. I spent $2,300 hiring a company to install hurricane shutters on all my windows. I had my roof inspected and reinforced at a cost of $3,800. I secured everything in my yard, cleared my gutters, and trimmed all the trees close to my house. My neighbor, Tom Bradshaw, watched me work from his driveway. "You're going overboard, Rachel," he said. "The HOA has insurance. If something happens, they'll cover it. The HOA insurance covers common areas. Tom, not your house." "Well, my homeowner's insurance will cover it then. No point spending all that money on prevention." I saw Karen drive by slowly, staring at my hurricane shutters with obvious disapproval. But she didn't stop. The week before Melissa hit, Barbara held an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. About 40 residents showed up, which was actually a good turnout for us. "I want everyone to take this seriously," Barbara said, standing at the front of the room. "I've reviewed the storm projections, and we're looking at sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, possibly higher. The storm surge could bring flooding to low-lying areas, which includes parts of our community." "I think Barbara's being overly dramatic," Karen interrupted from her seat in the front row. "We've had hurricane warnings before, and they always fizzle out. Remember last year? All that panic for nothing." "Last year was a Category 1 that shifted course," Barbara said patiently. "Melissa is Category 4 and heading directly toward us. This is not the time for complacency." "Well, I for one think spending thousands on preparations is wasteful," Karen said, looking around the room for support. "The HOA should be focused on maintaining property values, not spreading fear." Several newer residents nodded in agreement. They didn't know Karen yet, didn't understand that she opposed anything Barbara suggested purely out of spite. "Property values won't matter if your house is gone," Barbara said, raising her hand in a calming gesture as some residents began to murmur anxiously. "Please, everyone, prepare. Better safe than sorry." I left that meeting feeling uneasy. Too many people were taking Karen's advice instead of Barbara's. Melissa hit on a Thursday morning in late September. I'd evacuated to my sister's house inland, 2 hours away. We watched the news coverage with growing horror. The storm was even worse than predicted. Sustained winds of 145 miles per hour, gusts up to 170. The storm surge was catastrophic, flooding neighborhoods that had never flooded before. The power went out across the entire region. News helicopters showed devastation, roofs torn off, houses collapsed, cars submerged. I couldn't reach anyone in Sunset Pines. Cell towers were down. All I could do was wait and worry. It was 5 days before they let residents return. I drove back alone, my sister begging me to wait longer, but I had to see my house. The roads were a nightmare. Debris everywhere, traffic lights out, power lines dangling dangerously across intersections. National Guard trucks rumbled past, heading toward the worst-hit areas. When I turned onto my street, my heart sank. The neighborhood looked like a war zone. Tom's house next door had lost its entire roof. Blue tarps already flapping in the breeze where emergency crews had covered the damage. The Henderson house across the street had a tree through the living room. The Martinez house had flooded. Furniture piled on the curb, destroyed by water damage. Every house I passed showed severe damage. Broken windows, torn siding, collapsed fences, destroyed landscaping. And then I saw my house. It stood there, completely intact. The hurricane shutters had protected the windows. The reinforced roof hadn't lost a single shingle. My yard was messy with branches and leaves, but the house itself looked exactly as I'd left it. Undamaged. Whole. Standing proud, while everything around it had fallen, I started crying with relief. I was crying with joy. My home had survived when I saw Karen standing at the end of my driveway. Her house was 3 doors down, and it had been hit hard. Part of her roof was gone, and several windows were shattered despite the plywood she'd hastily put up. She was staring at my house with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, resentment, disbelief. "You got lucky," she said coldly. "I got prepared," I replied. She turned and walked away without another word, but I saw her pull out her phone and start typing furiously. Over the next 2 weeks, the neighborhood struggled to recover. FEMA trailers appeared on several streets. Insurance adjusters swarmed the area. Contractors were booked months out, charging premium emergency rates. The community center became a hub for relief supplies and information. Barbara was there every day, coordinating with local authorities, helping residents file insurance claims, connecting people with resources. She'd lost part of her own fence and had water damage in her garage, but she put her own recovery on hold to help everyone else. I'd see her there each morning when I stopped by to volunteer. Her silver hair slightly disheveled, glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed paperwork. Always ready with a warm smile and helpful advice, despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked me one morning while we were organizing donated supplies. "I feel guilty," I admitted. "My house is fine while everyone else lost so much." Barbara raised her hand and placed it on my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't feel guilty for being prepared. You did the smart thing." I wish more people had listened to the warnings. "Karen's been giving me strange looks," I said. "Karen's bitter about everything," Barbara said with a slight laugh. "Her insurance company is apparently fighting her on the claim because she didn't properly maintain her roof. She's looking for someone to blame, and it won't be herself." I should have realized then that I'd become Karen's target. The HOA held an emergency meeting 3 weeks after the hurricane. The community center was packed. Over 80 residents, many still living in hotels or with relatives while their homes were repaired. Barbara stood at the front, looking exhausted but determined. "First, I want to thank everyone who's been helping with recovery efforts," she began. "We've made incredible progress. The common areas are mostly cleared. The pool repairs are scheduled, and we're working with the county on street repairs." "What about financial assistance?" someone called out. "A lot of us are facing huge deductibles." "I've been working with the county emergency management office," Barbara said. "There are some FEMA grants available for residents who meet certain criteria. I have information packets available after the meeting." That's when Karen stood up. "I have a proposal," she said loudly. The hurricane exposed serious problems with our community standards. Some houses were severely damaged, while others weren't. This creates an aesthetic imbalance that's going to hurt our property values. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you suggesting?" Barbara asked carefully. "I'm suggesting we implement an emergency uniformity clause," Karen said, pulling out a printed document. "All homes should reflect similar levels of post-hurricane appearance to maintain community cohesion. Homes that are significantly better or worse than the median should be required to conform." "That doesn't make any sense," I said, unable to stay quiet. "You want people to damage their houses to match their neighbors?" "I'm talking about mandatory cosmetic modifications to ensure visual uniformity," Karen said, turning to glare at me. "We can't have some houses looking perfect while others are still in recovery. It creates division and resentment in the community." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Barbara said firmly, raising her hand to quiet the murmurs spreading through the room. "We're not going to punish residents for taking proper precautions or fine them for having intact houses." "Karen, this discussion is over." "I moved to put it to a vote," Karen said. "There's nothing to vote on," Barbara said. "It would violate state law and our insurance obligations." Next topic. Karen sat down, but the look she gave me made my blood run cold. 2 days later, I received the certified letter, notice of violation, $10,000 fine. According to the letter, my property was in violation of Section 12.4.7 of the HOA bylaws regarding community aesthetic uniformity standards following natural disaster events. My house's excessive state of preservation created a visual disruption to neighborhood cohesion and demonstrated willful noncompliance with community recovery standards. I had 30 days to either pay the $10,000 fine or make my house match the community median damage level through appropriate cosmetic modifications. They wanted me to damage my own house. I immediately called Barbara. "I got a letter from Karen," I said, my voice shaking. "She's fining me $10,000 because my house survived the hurricane." She's what? Barbara's voice was sharp with anger. Rachel, email me that letter right now. This is completely illegal and outside her authority. I'll handle this. But when I forwarded the email, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The letter wasn't just from Karen as vice president. It was also signed by 3 board members, newly elected members who'd run in a special election 2 weeks ago while everyone was distracted by hurricane recovery. Karen had been busy building her coalition while the rest of us were focused on survival. And at the bottom of the letter was one more signature that made everything clear. Approve, Sunset Pines, HOA Board of Directors. Karen hadn't just sent this on her own authority. She'd gotten board approval. She'd made this official. I stared at those signatures, my hands trembling. Karen had outmaneuvered Barbara. She'd used the chaos of the hurricane to stack the board with her supporters, and now she had the votes to do whatever she wanted. $10,000. They were really going to fine me $10,000 for having a house that survived. I looked out my window at my intact home, the home I'd worked so hard to protect, and realized that Karen wasn't just coming after me. This was her move against Barbara, her way of proving who really controlled Sunset Pines now. And if she could do this to me, she could do it to anyone who stood in her way. What would you do if your HOA tried to fine you for surviving a hurricane? Have you ever dealt with an HOA that punished you for doing the right thing? Share your stories in the comments below. I need to know I'm not alone in this insanity. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, reading and rereading the violation letter until the words blurred together. $10,000. The number kept repeating in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I'd spent my savings on hurricane preparations, nearly $6,000 total, and now they wanted almost double that as punishment for those preparations working. At 7 in the morning, my phone rang. Barbara? Rachel, I've been up all night researching this, she said without preamble. What Karen's doing is illegal on multiple levels. It violates state property rights laws, it contradicts our own HOA bylaws, and it's potentially criminal extortion. We're going to fight this. Barbara, did you see the signatures? She has board approval. She has signatures from 3 board members who were elected in a special election that barely anyone knew about, Barbara said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. Karen scheduled that election during hurricane recovery when only 15% of residents could attend. Tom Bradshaw, Jennifer Walsh, and Marcus Chun, all new residents who don't understand how HOAs are supposed to work. Karen's been feeding them lies about me blocking necessary improvements, and they believe her. What can we do? First, you're not paying that fine. Second, I'm calling an emergency board meeting to challenge this violation. Third, I'm contacting our HOA attorney. And fourth, Barbara paused. I'm going to make sure every resident in Sunset Pines knows what Karen's trying to do. She's going to come after you next. I warned. Let her try, Barbara said firmly. I've been playing nice for too long. Time to remind Karen that I didn't become HOA president by accident. 2 hours later, I received an email from Barbara sent to every resident in Sunset Pines. Urgent illegal HOA fine alert. A resident is being fined $10,000 for having a house that survived Hurricane Melissa. This fine violates state law and our bylaws. Emergency meeting Thursday at 7 p.m. Your property rights are at stake. My phone started ringing within minutes. First, it was Tom Bradshaw. From next door. Rachel, is this true? You're being fined for your house not getting damaged. Yes, Tom. I got the letter 2 days ago. That's insane. I mean, I lost my whole roof. Why would anyone be punished for being smarter than me? Then it was Jennifer Martinez across the street. Then the Hendersons. Then families I barely knew. Everyone was outraged. Some were angry at Karen. Others were worried they'd be next. If they could fine me for having an intact house, what else could they fine people for? But not everyone was supportive. At noon, I found a note taped to my front door. No signature, just a printed message. Stop making the rest of us look bad. Pay the fine and stop being selfish. I took a photo of it and sent it to Barbara. Save it, she texted back. Evidence of harassment. That afternoon, I decided to go to the community center. I needed to pick up some donated supplies, mostly cleaning products that the relief organizations were distributing. When I walked in, the atmosphere immediately changed. Several people who were chatting stopped and stared at me. I recognized two of them, newer residents who'd moved in within the last year. There she is, one of them, a woman named Patricia, said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The woman who thinks she's better than everyone else. I stopped. Excuse me. You heard me. While the rest of us are struggling with insurance companies and living in hotels, you're sitting pretty in your perfect house. And now you're causing problems by fighting the HOA. The HOA is fining me for having a house that survived, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. How is that fair? What's not fair is you making the neighborhood look inconsistent. Patricia sighed. My house has water damage. The Johnsons lost half their roof. Your house looks like nothing happened. It makes the rest of us look negligent. So I should damage my house to make you feel better? You should think about the community instead of yourself, Patricia snapped. I grabbed my supplies and left, my hands shaking. Karen's poison was spreading faster than I'd realized. She wasn't just trying to find me, she was turning neighbors against each other, making my survival seem like selfishness instead of smart preparation. When I got home, there was a car parked in front of my house. Karen's silver Mercedes. She was sitting inside, talking on her phone and staring directly at my front door. When she saw me, she ended her call and got out. Rachel, we need to talk, Karen said, walking up my driveway. She was dressed in designer jeans and a white blazer, looking completely put together, despite her house still having visible storm damage down the street. I have nothing to say to you. Don't be dramatic. I'm here to offer you a way out. Karen pulled out her phone and showed me something. I had a contractor give me an estimate. For $8,500, you can have cosmetic damage applied to your house that matches the neighborhood median, new siding with impact marks, some shingle removal to simulate wind damage, maybe a cracked window or two. You'd still save $1,500 compared to the fine, and you'd be in compliance. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to pay someone to damage my house? I want you to be a team player, Kara said. This neighborhood is supposed to be a community. Rachel, we're supposed to look out for each other, support each other, match each other. Your house stands out, and that's not good for anyone's property values. My property value is excellent because my house is undamaged. Your property value won't matter when potential buyers see you're in a neighborhood with an inconsistent aesthetic, Karen said smoothly. Trust me. I've been in real estate. Buyers want uniformity. They want to know their neighbors care about the same standards they do. You've never worked in real estate, I said. I remember you telling Barbara you were a lifestyle consultant. Whatever that means. Karen's smile froze. I've had many careers. The point is, you need to make a choice. Pay the $8,500 for modifications, pay the $10,000 fine, or face legal action from the HOA. Those are your three options. I have a fourth option, I said. I can fight this illegal fine and make sure everyone knows what you're really doing. And what am I really doing? Karen asked, her voice dropping to something harder, colder. You're using the hurricane as an excuse to consolidate power. You're punishing anyone who doesn't fall in line. You're trying to force Barbara out by proving you can override her authority. This was never about aesthetic uniformity. Karen, this is about control. Karen's expression shifted into pure contempt. You're right about one thing. This is about control. Barbaras had control of this HOA for 8 years, blocking every meaningful change, keeping us stuck in the past with her outdated ideas about community management. Some of us want Sunset Pines to be a premier neighborhood with standards that reflect excellence, not mediocrity. Barbara's ideas built this community, I said. You've been here less than 3 years, and you think you know better than someone who's lived here for 15? I know that in 3 years, I've accomplished more than Barbara did in 8, Karen said. I've updated our architectural guidelines, implemented new violation tracking systems, and brought accountability to residents who thought they could do whatever they wanted. Barbara let this place turn into I'm restoring order. You're creating a dictatorship." Karen laughed, actually laughed, raising her hand to her chest in mock amusement. "A dictatorship? Please. I'm implementing reasonable standards that any quality HOA would have. If you don't like it, you can always sell your house and move somewhere with lower standards. I'm sure there are plenty of neighborhoods that would welcome someone who thinks rules don't apply to them. Get off my property." "You have 30 days, Karen said, turning to leave. "After that, we'll place a lien on your house. And believe me, Rachel, I will personally ensure that lien goes through. You made this personal by going to Barbara. You could have just paid the fine quietly, and this would all be over. Now you're going to learn what happens when you challenge me." She walked back to her Mercedes, got in, and drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure I watched her leave. I went inside and immediately called Barbara. "She just showed up at my house," I said, telling her about the conversation. "That's witness intimidation," Barbara said. "Rachel, I need you to document everything. Every interaction with Karen. Every anonymous note. Every threat. We're building a case not just against this fine, but against Karen's entire pattern of harassment. What if she wins?" I asked quietly. "What if she actually gets away with this?" "She won't," Barbara said with a confidence I wished I felt. "I've already spoken with our HOA attorney. He's reviewing the fine, and his preliminary opinion is that it's completely but we need to be strategic. Karen has board support right now, which means we need to change the board composition." "How?" "She controls the elections." "She controls them because nobody's paying attention," Barbara said. "But now everyone's watching. Your fine has woken people up. We have an emergency meeting Thursday. That's our chance to show residents what Karen really is." Thursday evening arrived. I got to the community center early and found it already filling up. This wasn't the typical 20 or 30 residents who usually attended meetings. There had to be over 100 people there. Maybe more. People were standing along the walls because all the chairs were taken. I saw Tom and Jennifer and dozens of other neighbors whose homes had been damaged. But I also saw Patricia and several other newer residents sitting in the front row near Karen. Barbara arrived carrying a box of documents. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, but determined. She sat up at the front table and tested the microphone. Karen arrived exactly at 7 p.m., dressed in a navy blue business suit, her hair perfectly styled. She brought her 3 board members with her. Tom Bradshaw, my neighbor, not the same Tom who'd called me earlier, Jennifer Walsh, and Marcus Chun. They sat at the board table looking uncomfortable. "Let's begin," Karen said, taking control before Barbara could speak. "I know there's been some controversy about a recent fine. It's not controversial. It's illegal," someone shouted from the back. "Let her speak," Barbara said calmly, raising her hand to quiet the crowd. "Everyone will have their turn." Karen nodded curtly. "The fine issued to Rachel Morrison is completely within our authority under Section 12.4.7 of our bylaws. This section, which was unanimously approved by the board, I might add, allows for aesthetic uniformity enforcement following community-wide events." "Show us that section," Tom Martinez called out. "Show us exactly where it says you can fine someone for having an undamaged house." "The bylaw language allows for interpretation," Karen said, "and the board has interpreted it to include post-disaster aesthetic standards." "I have the actual bylaws here," Barbara said, pulling out a thick document from her box. Section 12.4.7 is about architectural modifications during reconstruction after a disaster. It requires residents who rebuild to match existing neighborhood architecture. It says nothing about fining people whose houses weren't damaged. She held up the document, and someone took a photo with their phone. "The spirit of the law," Karen began. "The spirit of the law is irrelevant when you're fining someone $10,000, Barbara interrupted. "Karen, you don't get to make up rules because you don't like how someone's house looks. This isn't about personal feelings," Karen said, her voice rising slightly. "This is about maintaining community standards. Property values in Sunset Pines have been declining since the hurricane. We need consistency to reassure potential buyers that this is still a premier neighborhood. Property values are declining because half the houses are damaged and under repair, Barbara said. Rachel's undamaged house is actually helping our overall neighborhood value, not hurting it. I disagreed, Karen said flatly. Well, I have an appraiser's report that says otherwise, Barbara said, pulling out another document. She'd been busy. This independent assessment, completed 2 days ago, shows that Rachel's property is currently valued at $375,000, which is 15% higher than the pre-hurricane assessment. Meanwhile, damaged properties have lost value. Rachel's house is literally holding up our neighborhood's worth. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People were pulling out their phones, taking notes, some recording the meeting. Karen's face was flushing red. Fine. So her house has good value. That doesn't change the fact that it creates visual inconsistency that affects the neighborhood's overall appeal. To whom? I asked, standing up. I hadn't planned to speak, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Who exactly is offended by my house not being destroyed? What buyer is going to say, I'd love to buy here, but that house over there survived a hurricane and I find that disturbing? Some people laughed. Karen glared at me. You're oversimplifying a complex issue, Karen said. No, you're overcomplicating a simple fact, I shot back. You're mad that I prepared and you didn't. You're mad that Barbara was right about the hurricane being serious. You're mad that your authority isn't absolute, so you invented a violation to punish me and prove you're in charge. That's a serious accusation, Karen said coldly. Then let's test it, Barbara said, standing up and raising her hand to get everyone's attention. I move for an immediate board vote to rescind Rachel's fine. All in favor? You can't just call votes, Karen protested. As HOA President, yes I can, Barbara said. She turned to the 3 board members sitting at the table. Tom, Jennifer, Marcus. You 3 voted to approve this fine. Now that you've heard the facts, how do you vote? Should Rachel's $10,000 fine be rescinded? The 3 board members looked at each other nervously. They were trapped. Vote no, and look like tyrants in front of 100 angry neighbors. Vote yes, and admit Karen had manipulated them. Tom Bradshaw, the board member, spoke first. I vote to rescind the fine. I didn't understand the full situation when I approved it. I vote to rescind, Jennifer Walsh said quietly. Marcus Chun hesitated, looking at Karen. She was staring at him intently, a clear warning in her eyes. He swallowed hard. I vote to rescind. The room erupted in applause. Karen stood up so fast, her chair fell backward with a crash. This meeting is adjourned, she said sharply. But Barbara wasn't done. Actually, Karen, there's one more item on the agenda. I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in you as Vice President, given your attempt to implement illegal fines, intimidate residents, and manipulate board members. I believe you're unfit to serve in any HOA leadership position. The applause stopped. The room went completely silent. Karen's face had gone from red to white. This wasn't just about my fine anymore. Barbara was going for Karen's position, her power, her control over everything she'd worked 3 years to build. And every eye in that packed community center was waiting to see what would happen next. Can you believe Barbara challenged Karen right there in front of everyone? What would you have done in this situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is getting intense. The silence in the community center was deafening. Over 100 residents sat frozen, waiting to see how Karen would respond to Barbara's challenge. I could see Karen's hands trembling slightly, whether from rage or fear. I couldn't tell. You can't call a vote of no confidence without proper notice, Karen said, her voice tight. It requires 14 days advance notification to all board members and residents. Actually, Barbara said, pulling out yet another document from her box. According to her bylaws, Section 8.2.3, an emergency vote of no confidence can be called with a simple majority of residents present. If there's evidence of malfeasance or actions that harm the community, I'd say attempting to fine a resident $10,000 for having an undamaged house qualifies as both. Barbara raised her hand and gestured to the packed room. We have over 100 residents here tonight. That's more than a majority of our 230 households. We have a quorum to make this vote binding." Karen's face was a mask of fury. "This is a witch hunt. You're using one misunderstanding to destroy my reputation." "It's not a misunderstanding. When you showed up at Rachel's house to threaten her," Barbara said calmly. "It's not a misunderstanding when anonymous harassment notes appeared on her door. It's not a misunderstanding when you tried to intimidate board members into supporting an illegal fine." "I never threatened anyone," Karen shouted. "Then you won't mind if I play this," I said, standing up and holding up my phone. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I recorded our conversation on my driveway when you came to my house. Karen, the part where you said I'd learn what happens when I challenge you was particularly interesting. I hadn't actually recorded her. I was bluffing, but Karen didn't know that." Her eyes went wide. 10 Narrowed. "That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. Actually, Florida is a two-party consent state for private conversations," Barbara interjected. "But not for conversations on your own property, when someone comes to your door uninvited. Rachel had every legal right to record you." "Karen?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked trapped. "Let's vote," Barbara said, raising her hand to address the room. "All those in favor of removing Karen Westbrook from her position as HOA Vice President, raise your hands." Hands shot up all over the room. Tom Martinez, Jennifer Henderson, dozens of families whose houses had been damaged. Even some of the newer residents who'd initially supported Karen were raising their hands. I counted quickly. At least 80 hands, maybe more. Those opposed, about 15 hands went up, including Patricia and a few others from the front row. "The motion passes," Barbara said. "Karen, effective immediately. You are no longer Vice President of the Sunset Pines HOA. You'll need to return all HOA property, including keys, files, and the community center access codes, within 48 hours. Karen stood there, her face cycling through emotions: shock, rage, disbelief. Then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was bitter and cold. "You think this is over?" Karen said, looking directly at Barbara. "You think removing me from one position changes anything? I still live here. I'm still a resident, and I will make sure that every single person in this room regrets this decision." "Is that a threat?" Barbara asked quietly. "It's a promise," Karen said. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the exit. Before she left, she turned back one more time. "Enjoy your victory, Barbara. It won't last long." The door slammed behind her, and the room erupted in conversation. Barbara raised both hands for quiet. "Everyone, please. I know tonight was dramatic, but we still have community business to handle. First, we need to elect a new vice president. Second, we need to discuss hurricane recovery funding. And third, we need to review all of Karen's recent rule changes to make sure they're actually legal." The meeting continued for another 90 minutes. We elected Tom Martinez as the new vice president. He was a retired teacher who'd lived in Sunset Pines for 9 years and actually understood what community leadership meant. We discussed applying for additional FEMA grants, and Barbara promised to conduct a full audit of every rule Karen had implemented in the past year. When the meeting finally ended, people came up to thank Barbara and to apologize to me. Tom Bradshaw, my neighbor who'd lost his roof, pulled me aside. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you," he said. When Karen started talking about aesthetic uniformity, it almost made sense the way she explained it. She made it sound like you were being selfish. I should have known better. "Karen's good at manipulation," I said. "Don't beat yourself up about it. Still, I want you to know that if she tries anything else, you've got people who will stand up for you." I went home that night feeling relieved but uneasy. Karen's parting words kept echoing in my mind. "It won't last long." What did she mean by that? I found out 3 days later. I woke up Monday morning to find a certified letter in my mailbox. Not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm, Westbrook and Associates. I opened it with a sense of dread. Notice of lawsuit: Karen Westbrook versus Rachel Morrison and Sunset Pines HOA. defamation, harassment, conspiracy to deprive of property rights, and emotional distress. Damages sought, $500,000. I read it 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. Karen was suing me. She was suing me for $500,000 for defending myself against her illegal fine. The lawsuit claimed that I had maliciously conspired with HOA President Barbara Chen to harass and publicly humiliate Ms. Westbrook through false accusations and manufactured evidence. It claimed that my alleged recording was fabricated. It claimed that Barbara and I had orchestrated a political coup to seize control of the HOA for personal financial gain. It was complete fiction, but it was filed with the county court. It was real. I immediately called Barbara. "I got one too," Barbara said, her voice tight. "Karen's suing me for $750,000. She's claiming I abused my authority as president to conduct a personal vendetta against her. Can she do this? Can she just sue us for standing up to her?" "Anyone can file a lawsuit," Barbara said. "Doesn't mean she'll win, but it means we need lawyers, which means money, which means stress and time. That's what Karen's counting on. She's going to make fighting her so expensive and exhausting that we'll wish we'd never challenged her." "Don't have money for a lawyer," I said, my voice cracking. "I spent everything on hurricane prep and repairs." "Don't worry about that yet," Barbara said. "Let me make some calls. I know some people who might be able to help." But I was worried. $500,000. Even a frivolous lawsuit could bankrupt me in legal fees trying to defend against it. That evening, I found more notes taped to my door. 3 of them, all printed. No signatures. "Hope the lawsuit bankrupts you. You deserve everything coming to you. Karma's a bitch." I took photos of all 3 and sent them to Barbara. Then I noticed something. My mailbox flag was up, but I hadn't put any mail out. I walked over and opened it. Someone had dumped coffee grounds inside, ruining the few pieces of mail that were there. Petty vandalism, but vandalism nonetheless. I filed a police report. The officer who came was sympathetic, but realistic. "Without cameras or witnesses, there's not much we can do," he said, making notes on his tablet. "I'd recommend installing security cameras. You'd be surprised how many HOA disputes turn into harassment cases." "This is already a harassment case," I said. "Then definitely get cameras," he said. "Document everything. If it escalates, you'll need evidence." I spent $400 I didn't have on security cameras that night, installing them myself with instructions from YouTube videos. Front door, back door, driveway, all angles covered. The cameras proved their worth 2 days later. At 3:15 in the morning, my security system alert woke me up. Someone was on my property. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera app, my heart pounding. A figure in dark clothes, and a hood was spray painting something on my garage door. I couldn't see their face, but I could see what they were writing. "Hurricane survivor equals neighborhood traitor." I called 911 while watching the person finish and run off toward the street. The police arrived within 8 minutes, but the vandal was long gone. "At least you got it on camera this time," the officer said, reviewing the footage. "We'll investigate, but with the hood and dark clothes, identification is going to be tough. Could be Karen Westbrook herself, could be someone she's paying, could be a neighbor who believes her lies." The officer helped me file a report and took a copy of the video evidence. Then I spent the rest of the night scrubbing spray paint off my garage door, exhausted and furious and scared. In the morning, I posted photos of the vandalism to the Sunset Pines Community Facebook group with a caption, "This is what happens when you stand up against HOA corruption. Stay vigilant, neighbors." The responses were divided. Many people expressed outrage and offered to help clean or install cameras on my behalf. But others, clearly Karen's supporters, suggested I'd painted it myself for sympathy. Patricia commented, "Convenient that you just installed cameras and suddenly there's vandalism." False flag much? I wanted to scream. Barbara called an emergency meeting at her house that evening. She'd invited me, Tom Martinez, the new VP, and 3 other longtime residents who'd been vocal against Karen's tactics. "We have a serious problem," Barbara said, spreading documents across her dining room table. We were sitting in her kitchen, a cozy space with family photos on the walls and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Karen's lawsuit is just the beginning. I've been digging into her background, and I've found some very concerning information. She pulled out a printed article. Karen Westbrook has been involved in 3 previous HOA disputes in other states. In Georgia, she was sued for harassment by 2 different neighbors. In Texas, she was removed from an HOA board for financial irregularities. In North Carolina, she was part of an HOA that dissolved after multiple lawsuits over discriminatory enforcement. She's a professional HOA terrorist, Martinez said, shaking his head in disbelief. Essentially, yes, Barbara said, raising her hand to emphasize her point. She moves into a neighborhood, takes over the makes life miserable for anyone who opposes her, and then either gets forced out or moves on to the next community. It's a pattern. Why would anyone do that? I asked. Control, Barbara said simply. Some people are addicted to power, even small-scale power, like an HOA board. Karen's not doing this for property values or community improvement. She's doing it because she enjoys dominating people. So, what do? One of the other residents, a man named David, asked. We fight back with information, Barbara said. I'm going to distribute this background information to every resident in Sunset Pines. Let them know who they're really dealing with, and I'm going to contact the HOAs in those other states to see if anyone's willing to testify about Karen's behavior patterns. What about the lawsuit? Primera, asked. I've been in touch with a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes, Barbara said, smiling slightly. He's seen cases like this before. He thinks Karen's lawsuit is what's called ASLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to silence critics through legal intimidation. Florida has anti-SLAPP laws that can get the case dismissed and potentially make Karen pay our legal fees. Potentially. Nothing's guaranteed in law, Barbara admitted. But we have a strong case. Karen's lawsuit claims are provably false. We have documentation of her illegal fine, witnesses to her threats, and now we have video evidence of vandalism targeting you. Her lawsuit falls apart under basic scrutiny. Unless she convinces a judge otherwise, I said quietly. She won't, Barbara said firmly, raising both hands in a gesture of confidence. Trust me, Rachel, I've dealt with people like Karen before. They're bullies who fold when someone actually stands up to them with facts and legal backing. We just need to hold our ground. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. Karen's supporters, which seemed to shrink daily as more information came out, started a counter-campaign. They created a website called The Truth About Sunset Pines Corruption that painted Barbara and me as power-hungry manipulators who'd orchestrated a coup against reform-minded leadership. The website included doctored screenshots of text messages, misleading excerpts from HOA meetings, and testimonials from residents who claimed we'd threatened them. It was all lies, but it looked professional and convincing if you didn't know the full context. Barbara responded by creating a detailed timeline of events with supporting documentation, public HOA records, witness statements, everything that proved what had actually happened. She distributed it to every household and posted it to the community Facebook group. The battle for public opinion was fierce. Some residents didn't know who to believe. Others were tired of the drama and just wanted it to end. But most people, once they saw the evidence, sided with Barbara and me. Then came the HOA board meeting, where everything changed. It was mid-October, about 6 weeks after the hurricane and 4 weeks after Karen's removal from the board. The meeting was routine business, mostly updates on repairs and insurance claims. About 40 residents attended, which was normal for post-hurricane meetings. Karen showed up. She wasn't a board member anymore, but she was still a resident, and residents were allowed to attend meetings. She sat in the back row, silent, taking notes on her tablet. Her presence made everyone uncomfortable, but she wasn't technically doing anything wrong. Barbara was presenting an update on FEMA grant applications when Karen's phone rang loudly. The ringtone was obnoxiously loud, some pop song at maximum volume. "Karen, please silence your phone," Barbara said politely. Karen made a show of looking at the caller ID, her eyes widening. "I need to take this." It's important. You can step outside, Barbara suggested. No, I think everyone needs to hear this, Karen said, answering on speakerphone. Hello, Ms. Westbrook. This is Detective Martinez from the Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit. A voice came through the phone, loud enough for the whole room to hear. I'm calling about your report regarding embezzlement at the Sunset Pines HOA. The room went completely silent. Yes, Detective, Karen said, her voice dripping with false concern. Thank you for following up so quickly. I provided you with all the documentation showing irregular fund transfers and missing reserve account money. Have you had a chance to review it? We have, the voice said. We'll need to speak with your HOA President Barbara Chen as part of our investigation. Barbara's face went pale. Around the room, residents were murmuring, confused and alarmed. Karen was accusing Barbara of embezzlement, the woman who'd dedicated 8 years to this community, who'd helped everyone through the hurricane, who'd fought against Karen's corruption. I looked at Karen, and she was smiling. Not just smiling, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. This wasn't a real detective call, I realized with horror. This was staged. Karen had somehow faked a call to publicly accuse Barbara of crimes in front of the entire HOA, and judging by the shocked faces around me, some people were actually believing it. This woman actually faked a police call to accuse Barbara of embezzlement. Can you believe the lengths Karen went to? What do you think happens next? Comment below. Barbara stood up slowly, her face pale, but her voice steady. That's interesting, Karen, because the Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit doesn't make courtesy calls to inform suspects about investigations. They show up with warrants. Karen's smile faltered slightly. And another thing, I said, standing up and pulling out my own phone. Detective Martinez? That's the same name as our new HOA Vice President, Tom Martinez. What a coincidence. Tom stood up from the board table. I don't have a brother or cousin in law enforcement. There's no Detective Martinez in the Sheriff's Department that I know of. Let me call them and verify, Barbara said, pulling out her phone. She raised her hand to quiet the murmuring crowd. I have the Economic Crimes Unit's direct number because I worked with them on a construction fraud case 5 years ago. Let's see what they have to say about this investigation. Karen's face was losing color rapidly. You don't need to. Oh, I think I do, Barbara said, dialing. She put it on speaker. Sheriff's Department, Economic Crimes Unit. How can I help you? A woman's voice answered. Yes, this is Barbara Chen, HOA, President of Sunset Pines. I'm calling to inquire about an investigation into alleged embezzlement at our HOA. We just received a call from someone claiming to be Detective Martinez. There was a pause. Ma'am, we don't have a Detective Martinez in this unit. And we don't have any open investigations into Sunset Pines HOA. If someone called claiming to be from our department, that's impersonating an officer, which is a crime. You should file a report. Thank you, I will, Barbara said, ending the call. The room erupted. Residents were shouting, Someyat Karen, Someyin, soak some in confusion. Karen was standing frozen, her phone still in her hand. That was a fake call, Barbara said loudly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Karen just committed a crime in front of 40 witnesses. She impersonated a law enforcement officer to make false accusations against me. Someone must have pranked me. Karen stammered. I thought it was real. Really? I said, because the timing was awfully convenient. You showed up to this meeting, sat in the back, waited for the perfect moment, and then your phone just happened to ring with a fake detective on the line. I want to see her phone records, Tom Martinez said. Right now, show us who actually called you, Karen. Karen clutched her phone to her chest. That's private. You made a public accusation using that call, Barbara said. You don't get to hide behind privacy now. Show us the call log, or I'm calling the real police right now to report you for impersonating an officer and filing a false police report. Karen looked around the room, seeing no sympathy, no support. Just anger and disgust on every face. Even Patricia, who'd been one of her staunchest supporters, was shaking her head in disbelief. "Fine," Karen said, her voice barely a whisper. "Fine. You want to know the truth. I was trying to prove a point. Barbara's been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for years. Someone needed to show everyone that she's not the saint you all think she is." "By faking a criminal investigation," Tom Martinez said incredulously. "By committing actual crimes to accuse someone else of crimes." "I didn't commit any crimes," Karen said, her voice rising desperately. "It was a demonstration, a dramatic presentation to make people think critically about financial transparency in the HOA," Barbara said firmly, raising both hands to quiet the room again. "It was defamation. It was fraud. It was impersonation of a law enforcement officer, and it was done maliciously in front of witnesses. I'm calling the police now, and I'm filing charges." Karen's face went from white to red. "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me," Barbara said, dialing 911. Karen grabbed her purse and ran for the door. She actually ran, her heels clicking frantically on the floor as she rushed out of the community center. Several residents followed her out. Not to help her, but to make sure she didn't vandalize anything on her way out. The police arrived 15 minutes later. Barbara gave them a statement, showed them the recording she'd made on her phone of the entire meeting, and provided contact information for all 40 witnesses. The officers took notes, collected evidence, and assured Barbara they'd be following up with Karen. "This is pretty brazen," one officer said, reviewing Barbara's phone recording. "Impersonating an officer, especially in such a public way, that's a third-degree felony in Florida. She could face up to 5 years in prison if convicted." After the police left, the meeting continued, but nobody could focus on normal business. Everyone wanted to talk about what had just happened. "I can't believe I ever supported her," Patricia said, standing up. She looked at me directly, her eyes wet with tears. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. I said terrible things about you. I believe Karen's lies because she made them sound so reasonable. I'm so sorry." Others echoed similar sentiments. The newer residents who'd been swayed by Karen's manipulation were realizing they'd been used. The anonymous notes, the vandalism, the harassment, it was all adding up to a picture of someone who was genuinely dangerous, not just annoying. Barbara adjourned the meeting early. We were all emotionally exhausted. Over the next week, the legal situation developed rapidly. The police formally charged Karen with impersonating a law enforcement officer and filing a false police report. The charges were serious enough that her bail was set at $25,000. But that wasn't all. The HOA's attorney filed a countersuit against Karen for her lawsuit against Barbara and me. He argued that her suit was frivolous and malicious, filed in bad faith to harass and intimidate. He cited Florida's anti-LAPP statute and requested dismissal with sanctions. And then the real bombshell dropped. Barbara's investigation into HOA finances, prompted by Karen's fake embezzlement accusations, actually uncovered something. Karen had been embezzling. During her year as vice president, Karen had authorized payments to several vendors for emergency repairs and consulting services. Barbara traced these vendors and discovered they were shell companies, fake businesses that existed only on paper. The money had gone into accounts controlled by Karen herself. She'd stolen $47,000 from the HOA reserve fund. She accused me of embezzlement to distract from her own crimes. Barbara told me over coffee at her kitchen table. We were sitting there on a Saturday morning, surrounded by financial documents and spreadsheets. She laughed, but it was a tired laugh. Classic projection. She assumed I was doing what she was doing. How did she think she'd get away with it? Honestly, I think she planned to be HOA president by now, Barbara said, raising her coffee cup thoughtfully. If she'd successfully pushed me out, she'd have complete control over the finances and could have covered her tracks. She was playing a long game. But the hurricane and your find accelerated everything. She got desperate and sloppy. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, fake invoices, email trails showing Karen creating the shell companies. Barbara turned everything over to the police, and the district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Karen's legal troubles multiplied. Criminal impersonation charges. embezzlement charges, the HOAS civil suit seeking repayment of stolen funds, plus damages, my defamation countersuit. Barbara's countersuit. She was facing potential prison time and financial ruin. 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. "Rachel, this is Karen." Her voice was small, defeated, nothing like the confident woman who'd threatened me on my driveway. "I have nothing to say to you. Please, just listen. I'm calling to apologize." I almost hung up, but curiosity stopped me. "You're apologizing?" "My lawyer says I need to make restitution," Karen said. "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to settle all claims and drop any criminal complaints." "I'm not the one pressing criminal charges, Karen. The state is—" "That's not how it works." "I know, but your testimony could influence things." "Please, Rachel, I made mistakes. I got carried away. I let my ego and my need for control destroy everything. I'm going to lose my house over this. I'm going to lose everything." Part of me felt satisfaction hearing her admit defeat, but another part of me, a smaller part, felt pity. She'd brought this all on herself, but she was still a human being facing the complete destruction of her life. "Karen, I don't want your money. I want you to face consequences for what you did. You tried to fine me $10,000 for surviving a hurricane. You vandalized my property. You harassed me and Barbara. You stole from the HOA. You faked a police investigation. Those aren't mistakes. Those are crimes." "I know," Karen said quietly. "I know. I thought I was helping. I thought I was making the neighborhood better." "No, you didn't," I said. "You thought you were gaining power. There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. My lawyer's going to kill me for saying this. But you're right. I liked the power. I liked people listening to me, respecting me, fearing me a little. After my divorce, after losing everything in my marriage, the HOA was something I could control, and I went too far." "Yes, you did. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I'm going to plead guilty to the charges. I'm not going to fight the restitution. I'll pay back the HOA, and I'll accept whatever punishment comes. I just wanted you to know that." She hung up before I could respond. I told Barbara about the call later that day. "Her lawyer definitely told her to make that call," Barbara said, shaking her head with a slight smile. "It's part of a plea negotiation strategy. Show remorse. Make amends. Hope for a lighter sentence. But I believe the guilt is real. Karen's not a sociopath. She's just someone who let power corrupt her completely." "Do you think she'll actually go to prison?" "Probably not," Barbara said honestly. "First-time offender, shows remorse, makes restitution. She'll likely get probation, community service, maybe house arrest, but her HOA days are over. The charges will be public record. No community will ever let her near a board position again." "Good," I said. The legal resolution took 3 months. Karen pleaded guilty to embezzlement and filing false police reports. The impersonation charge was dropped as part of the plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, 800 hours of community service, and ordered to repay the $47,000 she'd stolen plus an additional $30,000 in penalties and legal fees to the HOA. Her lawsuit against Barbara and me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never refile it. She was ordered to pay our legal fees, which totaled $18,000. Karen sold her house in Sunset Pines 3 weeks after sentencing. I heard she moved to an apartment complex in the next county, somewhere with no HOA and no positions of power to tempt her. Life in Sunset Pines slowly returned to normal. The hurricane repairs were completed by January. The neighborhood looked better than ever, actually, because insurance money had funded upgrades that many residents had been putting off for years. Barbara was re-elected HOA president unanimously in the March elections. Tom Martinez continued as vice president. Together, they implemented new financial oversight rules and transparency measures to ensure that what Karen did could never happen again. The $10,000 fine that started everything was officially expunged from all records. The HOA sent me a formal letter of apology, which I framed and hung in my office as a reminder that standing up to corruption, no matter how scared you are, is always worth it. 6 months after the hurricane, I was working in my garden on a Saturday morning when Barbara walked over from her house down the street. She was carrying a plate of cookies. "I made too many," she said, laughing as she offered me the plate. "Figured you might want some." We sat on my porch, eating cookies and watching kids play in the street. My house still looked perfect, the only one on the block that hadn't needed major repairs. But now, instead of resentment, neighbors saw it as a symbol of good preparation and smart planning. "You ever regret standing up to Karen?" Barbara asked. "Every single day for about 3 months," I admitted. "But no, not anymore. She needed to be stopped." "Thank you for having the courage to fight back," Barbara said, raising her coffee cup in a small toast. "A lot of people wouldn't have. They'd have just paid the fine and moved on." "I couldn't let her win," I said simply, "and I couldn't let her destroy what you built here. This is a good community, Barbara. You made it that way." "We all made it that way," Barbara said, smiling warmly. "That's what a real community is. People looking out for each other, not tearing each other down." As I sat there on my porch, looking at my intact house and my repaired neighborhood, I realized something important. Hurricane Melissa had destroyed property, but it had also revealed character. It showed who prepared and who didn't, who helped and who exploited, who built up and who tore down. Karen had tried to punish me for surviving a storm, but in the end, she'd only destroyed herself, and our community had survived her too, stronger and more united than before. My house had weathered Hurricane Melissa, but more importantly, our community had weathered Hurricane Karen, and we were all better for it. Epilogue. 6 months later, I got a letter in the mail last week. No return address, postmarked from 2 counties away. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in shaky handwriting. "You were right. No signature." But I knew who it was from. I smiled, folded the letter, and threw it away. Some storms pass, and all you can do is rebuild and move forward. So that's how my HOA tried to fine me $10,000 for surviving a hurricane, and how fighting back exposed corruption, embezzlement, and fraud that would have destroyed our entire community. If you've ever dealt with HOA drama or abuse of power, share your story in the comments. And remember, sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up and say no when someone tries to punish you for doing the right thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.